What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the first 3 episodes of Invincible, now available on Amazon. This animated series is based on Robert Kirkman's comic, which debuted back in 2003 and ran for 144 issues, most of which I read. I think I bailed around issue 120 or so, but I'm just going to come out right and say it. This show is absolutely outstanding. I don't want to get ahead of myself because I obviously can't speak for the whole season, but when it comes to the first 3 episodes, they just nailed it. In terms of overall style and tone, and even getting down to specific scenes and panels, this is one of the most loving and faithful adaptations of a comic book I've ever come across. You could even make a case that they managed to improve upon some of the best scenes from the first few issues of the comic. I'll even go so far as to say that diehard fans of the original series are going to be completely floored by a couple really interesting tweaks to the original comic. And for folks who are totally new to this fictional setting, brace yourself. Invincible is completely and totally unlike the family-friendly PG-13 content we typically associate with stories about people in tights, and it delivers a level of action as well as some kinky sex that I found to be delightful, but more on that in a bit. I should also mention that Robert Kirkman wrote the pilot, and from what I've seen in episodes 2 and 3, he's clearly assembled an excellent writing staff for the show. When I got to the end of the 3 episodes that were part of my press screener, I was so hungry for more story that I immediately raided my comic book collection and reread the first 3 trade paperbacks, which I have right here, just to do a proper compare and contrast. Now, the first 3 episodes really only cover story beats in the first 2 trades, but my goal is going to be to stay slightly ahead of the show as the season continues to progress and unfold. So it's going to be a little challenging discussing the show without getting into any spoiler territory. So let me go ahead and get all my general comments out of the way first, and then I'll give you a warning before I dive into anything more specific. So if I were to try and sell this show to people who are unfamiliar with the source material, here's what I would say. Invincible is what you get when you have a writer who loves the best of what classic comics have to offer, while at the same time finds the gore and violence of the most hardcore horror movies imaginable to be totally irresistible. Most of the time, Invincible feels like this really pure, loving homage to the Silver Age of Marvel Comics of the 1960s, specifically the high school experience of Peter Parker grappling with his new powers and all the usual drama that teenagers experience on a daily basis. But the comic also owes a massive debt of gratitude to DC and Superman in that the central character of Invincible, Mark Grayson, played by Stephen Yeun, he's the son of the world's most powerful superhero who's basically a thinly disguised Superman, a character named Omni-Man, played brilliantly by J.K. Simmons. And if you only had this side of the story to consume, it would have been totally acceptable all by itself. It's just a really cool, stylish, retro superhero concept. But every once in a while, this tale just erupts with the most gut-churning gore imaginable, to the point where your jaw just smacks right into the floor, where you can't even believe what you're seeing. It's like you're watching an old episode of Challenge of the Super Friends, where suddenly the Legion of Doom and the Justice League decide to rip one another limb from limb. But in my opinion, it doesn't feel excessive. Most movies and shows, they tend to shy away from what would actually happen if someone with super strength actually hit a living being. But Robert Kirkman, he's always embraced the fact that bodies would quite literally explode in the most bloody ways imaginable if enhanced individuals decided to throw down. And I suspect some parents are going to completely freak out when they accidentally let their kids watch this show. But a decent chunk of those kids are going to think this is one of the coolest things they've ever seen, and probably a lot of adults too. Something to keep in mind is that Invincible was created the same year that Robert Kirkman also launched the comic book The Walking Dead, a comic which would eventually make Robert Kirkman one of the most commercially successful comic book creators ever. And given Kirkman's obvious love of horror and zombies, it should come as no surprise to anyone that Invincible would lean all the way in on the graphic content. For my part, I'm just relieved that this side of the story has not been toned down. I live in perpetual terror of the things that I love from the past being defanged, declawed, censored, but so far Invincible is exactly the show that fans of the comic are going to want to see. I should also mention the insane cast, which includes John Hamm, Zachary Quinto, Sandra Oh, Walton Goggins, Gillian Jacobs, Mark Hamill, Seth Rogen, Clancy Brown, and many, many more. This is a fictional setting that's already wildly overpopulated with countless heroes and villains, so in any given scene, suddenly the screen can just burst at the seams with all sorts of celebrity cameos. Part of the charm of this world is how there's so many apocalyptic threats on a regular basis that it all kind of starts to feel routine for everyone involved. And the show doesn't have to waste any time on world building or origin stories. This environment is already as fully formed and fleshed out as Marvel or DC, with decades of continuity in the rearview mirror, much like when I first started reading comics in the late 70s and the early 80s. And contrary to popular opinion, this is not a barrier to entry by any stretch of the imagination. A setting that's this fully formed excites the curiosity curiosity, and I'm always fired up to learn more as we meet one colorful character after another. As far as the release plan goes, the first 3 episodes are now available on Amazon, followed by a new episode every Friday until the season finale on April 30th. And I'll just say it again, I love it. I'm all in. This show feels like it was made just for me, and part of that's probably because of my sentimental affection for the comic, one that was really firing on all cylinders at a time where my consumption of comics was reaching an all-time high in the early 2000s. It was just a very easy time to be in love with the entire comic book industry, whether you're talking about the indies or mainstream comics. But my prediction is that this show is going to knock flat just about anybody who gives it a chance. But before I wrap up, I just want to make a few quick points to folks who are already familiar with the comics. So if you don't want spoilers, jump ship now. Boom, boom, boom. Last warning. All right. For my final point, I just want to underline the fact that this show has done something amazing by creating scenes that feel true to the spirit of the comic while at the same time cutting away a lot of the filler from the monthly title. And because there's so many scenes that are perfectly adapted, we know we're in good hands in terms of this new interpretation of the original source material. But a good example of this is just how quickly we're introduced to the Guardians of the Globe, basically the Justice League. We meet them almost immediately, and their subsequent destruction at the hands of Omni-Man has so much more weight than it did in the original comic, because as originally written, they were introduced quickly and then basically killed off in a single page. But with this show, we get one of the most epic, badass, superpowered battles that I've ever seen in animation. The cross-cutting between the characters who move at super speed and those who don't was so damn cool to watch, especially as we see a speedster, basically the Flash, pummeling his hands into hamburger meat, all in a futile attempt to stop Omni-Man from killing him. I was just enthralled. And this is probably the only time we'll ever see the equivalent of Batman getting whipped around like a bloody mop, so enjoy it while it lasts. But the other major improvement was with the ongoing battles with the Flaxans, this alien race that comes from a dimension where time moves much more quickly. Their first battles on Earth are expanded in a really interesting way, where we see them attack 3 separate times, where they've had many years in between each battle to learn how to overcome Earth's defenses. And once again, the gore is totally X-rated, and it feels like a legit war as the show whips out this killer music, all while Mark is struggling to rise to the challenge that keeps escalating in horrible ways. The conflict finally draws to a close when Omni-Man follows the Flaxans back through one of their portals and goes on this murderous rampage on a planetary level on the Flaxan homeworld, showing us all just how powerful he truly is. Looking ahead, I think there's tons to get excited about. I'm loving Walton Goggins as basically the equivalent of Nick Fury in this world, and I love how he's put this giant kaiju on ice for a rainy day after seeing how much Omni-Man struggled to fight it. But I'm loving the characterizations of Monster Girl, Robot, and Duplicate. That scene where she basically created an orgy for Rexplode to enjoy was exactly the kind of thing that Marvel and DC would be horrified to show. And I'm a big fan of the character of Eve as well. Now, she puts the smackdown on a villain after he has the audacity to lecture her about pandering to gender roles. Honestly, I really have no complaints about this show, and I give it my most enthusiastic recommendation. So that's all I have for now. I'm intensely excited to see what comes next. I think everybody should take a bow. Very much a job well done. But if you want to talk more about the comic or the show or whatever, hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out. And if you enjoyed this review, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell. That's very helpful to the channel. Hope everyone enjoys the show, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.